Hi, this is an overview of Netuitive Concepts. The agenda for today's meeting is to cover some of the most common industry issues, talk about what Netuitive is, speak about some of our integrations, and then lastly go through some of the analysis that Netuitive does to provide the information that it does. Some of the top challenges for IT operations and production support. This is a third-party study that actually really hit home and resonated well with the folks at Netuitive. There's so many different things that come into play with large enterprises and organizations, but just to go through this, business is significantly impacted before outages or slowdowns are resolved. Absolutely. The complexity of the systems that are used today within large financial institutions, manufacturing, just any type of telecommunications is so complex that you could have small issues in a minute area of the organization which can manifest and become systemic and actually impact other areas of the organization and actually stop services from flowing freely. Those types of things are hard to find because you don't have typically a holistic view of all the different independent components or the discrete types of systems that are feeding into the federated picture of the service delivery. So being able to stop those service affecting outages before they manifest into such a big problem is difficult. And current management tools lack support of mixed technologies and applications. That is so true because you have specialized application servers and you've got certain types of applications that you've built, and there's so many different components to that, and the application servers are housed on virtualized servers, and the virtualization takes into consideration your host and resource pools, and it just goes on and on and on, and then you throw in, hey, I've got database servers, I've got web servers, I've got firewalls, I've got all these different components. And there's really not an easy way to pull all that together so that you can have that holistic view, or you can take a look and just pinpoint and say, hey, this is a problem and I need to address it. And then costly and inefficient problem resolution. Typically when you have an issue that is service affecting, most organizations put together these things that are Tiger Team calls. And they pull resources from the different areas of the organization. They get them together either on the phone or through the web or some type of mechanism, and they stay on the line together. Each individual subject matter expert is looking at their area and trying to identify is it their areas that are causing the problems, and what can we do to get to a resolution more quickly. And that is an incredibly inefficient use of resources when you have to pull people in to look at something that might not be an issue in their area. I mean, you're taking those guys away from things that they could be doing, either generating revenue or being much more productive. And then not proactive. This really resonates well with me. I was with a customer last year, and their problem process was so bad that what happened is the customers would actually have to call in and let them know that there was an issue before a trouble ticket got logged. And it was such a lengthy process and such a painful process that a lot of customers would just not even call in. They would actually just hope that the problem went away so that they didn't have to open up these trouble tickets. And when it got to a point that was painful enough, there was enough margin, they would actually call and get on the line. So just from that perspective, being able to be a lot more proactive instead of reactive to problem issues is a big issue today. And then lastly, the virtualization cloud. I spoke about that briefly just a moment ago, but virtualization is a fantastic this thing that's happened with computing in this past decade, and it's allowed us to reduce the footprint and actually have dynamic types of computing, and there's just so many great things that virtualization has brought to the table. However, it really muddies the water when it comes to being able to triage and troubleshoot and identify the root cause of a problem, because now you're not just worried about a server. That server is housed in a virtualized host, and that virtualized host is part of a cluster, and that cluster has resource pools and data stores, and all these different resources are being shared now. So an impact in one area of that virtualized environment could actually fall over into and affect the server that you're using for your service delivery. So virtualization, proactive analysis, being able to quickly identify where the root cause of problems are and not have to pull in subject matter expertise and waste valuable resources, and actually having a tool that was holistic. across the other tools so that you could take a look and see just at a glance, this is how my service is running. So these are some top challenges, and they're things that actually play right into the Netuitive sweet spot. So I love this Gartner quote at the bottom. Organizations collect about 300% more metric than they did 4 years ago, but only analyze about 30 or 40%. Several years ago, I used this slide a lot to talk about servers because it really resonated well. And that's actually the picture that we have up here. And if you think about it, you've got different types of servers. You've got database servers, web servers, application servers, file and print servers, specialized servers, servers for Active Directory, servers. There's just so many different types of servers that are out there. And each type of server probably has a specific type of metric that you need to monitor. And in order to know how to monitor an email server, for example, you're going to have to pull in a subject matter expert, and they're going to have to sit down and say, well, these are the metrics that we're pulling from the underlying agent, and if you look at these 4 or 5 different metrics, it can help us identify that there's a problem with email or not. So for each specialized type of server, you're going to have special set of rules to say this is the type of metric that I need to pull in. And when I pull it in, there's a certain threshold that I need to set for these guys. So, I mean, that seems somewhat manageable. But when you throw together, there's 20 types of servers. I'm going to have 20 different types of profiles to pull this data in. And then at that point, you're going to have to look at the situation and say, well, these servers are more utilized than the other servers, so I'm going to have to start setting thresholds to pull this data in to match for the busy servers, and then other thresholds for the servers that aren't so busy. And I'm going to have to create these groups, and then I'm going to have to start managing all this threshold management process. And it really gets to be extremely tedious and difficult. And the slide we've got here says it's humanly impossible and manual-based tools don't work. Well, you can sort of make it work, but what happens is you get caught in this threshold management hell. Because you're always having to go in and change things, and it becomes extremely difficult. And from a server perspective, I think everybody can kind of understand that. But what I've noticed in the past several years is it's not just servers. I think servers were the entry point for Netuitive because large organizations had become so complex, and there were so many different variables out there and so many things that needed to be managed from just a server perspective and that physical component, that it was difficult, and we really met a need there. But what I've realized is when you have more complexity and you have just thousands and millions of metrics that you need to go through, and you need to figure out, well, is this a problem or it's not a problem, this is really where Netuitive shines, because the more complex, the better for us, because we're able to learn. We're able to figure out this is the normal behavior across a very complex set of metrics. So this is a problem or it's not a problem. So in essence, large financial institutions, credit card processing, data flows, customer experience transactions, all those types of things, when you feed them together, and it's just so much stuff to analyze, physically you're going to fail. If you're manually trying to look at something like that, if you're manually setting thresholds, you're on a road to failure. But by having some type of automated analytics, it really addresses this issue, and it scales. So the more complex you get, the analytics is going to do the work for you. So it's not a humanly impossible task any longer. So Netuitive is software. First and foremost, we're software. We don't sell hardware. We don't stick things out on the servers. But what we do require is a feed from third-party software. So we pull in information from your networks, from storage, from your virtualization, from your cloud infrastructure. We pull things from application servers, database servers, just the physical servers. We pull user experience data in, and we also can pull business metrics in. And the interesting thing is, as we're pulling this data, we're feeding it into our behavior learning analytics engine. And we learn the relationships of the metrics of the components that we're pulling in, that we're feeding from these third-party integrations. We learn those relationships, and over a period of time, we're able to discern normalcy. This is normal behavior for this set of managed elements, and this is abnormal behavior. So being able to spot those anomalies, the anomalistic behavior, gives us the ability to turn around and say, well, how anomalistic is it? Is it very, very different, or is it just a little bit, maybe something's a little bit different? So understanding and being able to discern what's normal and what's not normal gives us the ability to turn around and share that information with third-party systems through our trusted alarms, send it to external resources, other tools and systems, and it really helps to triage and get closer to that root cause of what's causing your service affecting outage. But really, I mean, what Netuitive is software that does analytic behavior learning, and we're able to discern what's normal and alert you when things are anomalistic. So the way that Netuitive works, this is just for a single system. So generally speaking here, we can scale to very large systems, and we're running some of, we're actually managing some of the largest virtualization customers in the world right now with Netuitive. And the way that this is set up is really kind of simple, and it's really elegant. Basically, we've got to get the information from the third-party systems into our analytics engine, and once it's into the analytics engine, we have to do some processing, and once we do the processing, we're able to share our information with whomever. But there's several different areas here. We've got 3 different types of integrations that we can do. One is what we call an IAPI integration, and that's where we integrate with third-party systems through their internal databases or their centralized databases. And that type of integration can talk directly to our analytics server. This is what we do for integrations like HPBAC and some SiteScope and things like that. And then we also have an integration that collects directly to a proxy collector, which is a database that sits alongside the analytics service. And this is what we do for some of our virtualization integrations, for instance, VMware. And this gives us the ability to capture data at a pretty rapid pace, and then turn around and have that data readily available for the analytics service. And then lastly, we can pull data in from these pieces of software called the remote collector. And this is the latest technology that we used. It allows us to scale just incredibly. It allows us a lot of different benefits by being outside of the actual analytics service. So we can quickly in the field change things if necessary and write new integrations and kind of do things a little more quickly. But the remote collector can gather information from a myriad of different ways. We've got plugins that you can just drop right into the remote collector, and they know how to talk to the third-party systems. And then we can also collect data from things like command files or XML or just HTTP. So we can go out and grab that information, format it into something that the remote collector understands, and then turn around and send that up into the analytics service for future processing. But we have a couple of data stores that are up here. We have an application server. We got the core files, and we keep locally accessed files there for things that are being used frequently. And so we have 2 types of files: a correlation file and a status file for each managed element that stay there. And then we also have a database server, and we update that database server pretty much constantly. And a lot of the visualizations that you see with Netuitive and a lot of the reporting come directly from the Tomcat talking to that analytics database. So this is just a really simple architecture of how Netuitive is deployed. So in explaining the way that Netuitive does its magic and how it kind of keeps away from the threshold management, it's best to understand what a traditional fault management solution or problem management solution might do. And just about any open source or pay-for type solution is going to give you the ability to go out and grab metrics from a third party or from a server or a tool or what have you, and bring that data back, log it into a database, and say, well, this is what the value was at this point in time. And over a period of time, you can start to see this bandwidth or this baseline to say, okay, well, I know that every day this is what it looks like for CPU utilization. So what happens is people will go and they will set thresholds to say, okay, well, I can expect anytime that I get CPU utilization above 75%, I would like to be alarmed. And what happens, and this is a very common situation, is you start receiving a lot of alarms that are nebulous. There is no problem. CPU utilization exceeded 75%, but it was just a burst and it went right back down. But what happens is if you're creating trouble tickets or you're creating these alarms and people are spending resources, they're taking their time and they're looking into the problems, after a little while of going and looking into these issues and finding that there's nothing wrong, they'll come back and they'll just start ignoring the alarms. And you don't want that to happen, right? Now this is just for one metric. So think about if you had 10 metrics and you're trying to set individual thresholds for each one of these 10 metrics. And as you're starting out, you start to see, well, I set this one wrong and this one wrong and this one wrong, and I'm getting all this alarming. Before long, people are really not paying attention to the alarming system at all. So what a lot of folks will do is they will set those thresholds exceptionally high. And what's going to happen? You're going to miss alerts, right? So you set a threshold so very high that the alert never comes through and you're going to miss some problems. Okay, so this is one of the dilemmas that people fall into. And the tool manufacturers over the years, they said, this is a problem. Threshold management is just becoming such a hassle because we've got all these things that we need to look at, and it's very difficult, and people are ignoring our systems. So they came up with the concept of dynamic thresholding. And that's not a bad thing, because for a single variable, you're looking at CPU utilization, and you can say, well, if I can assume that this is normal behavior for my baseline, I can give it a standard deviation above and below, and just basically anytime something falls within that baseline, if it's above or below one standard deviation, I'm going to assume that it's okay and not alarm. Well, that works okay to a degree for single variables, for just CPU or memory or disk. But what happens is if you operate at a very high range or you operate at a very low range, that can have some pretty sticky issues, and you're still just looking at this single variable. Okay, but what Netuitive came up with was a little different, and instead of just looking at the single variables, so instead of just looking at CPU and just looking at memory and just looking at disk, we like to look at multiple metrics. Okay, and we call this the multivariative self-learning correlation. So if you've got your CPU, memory, disk, and I/O, if you notice there's some different performance benchmarks that are here. Instead of trying to set thresholds for each one of those, what Netuitive does is it learns the relationship between these metrics. Okay, so we can expect to have a statistical relationship between CPU and memory and disk and I/O throughout different periods of the day when we learn the performance. And the nice thing is, if you know statistically that as I have higher CPU utilization, I'm also going to see memory raise a little bit, but I might see disk I/O drop down. We can learn those types of relationships. So as the systems get busier or they get less busy, as long as those relationships stay intact for that time of day, then we're able to discern, what, we really don't care about the thresholds. We can see that everything is operating correctly right now, so there's no need to alarm. So it's a little different type of mechanism here. Instead of trying to set thresholds, we're learning relationships between the key performance metrics that we see as important to let you know that there is a service or a performance issue that might lead to a service impacting failure. So the relationships between the metrics. And what that does for us, this is a great example. If you're taking a look at a metric and you're just looking at the single metric and you're doing a standard deviation above or below, you get this really large bandwidth, right? So you can say, okay, well, for this single metric, if I'm doing dynamic bandwidth, I can see that I'm right in the range, there's no issue. But if you look at this contextually, if you take a look at the computed value that Netuitive gives you based on the relationship between the key performance metrics that we're evaluating, you can see that you get a much tighter band line here. And right about, I guess, 1 o'clock, we start alarming. Right here we can say this is anomalistic behavior. Even though, and for this one particular metric, even though from a dynamic baseline this looks okay, by looking at the relationships we're able to discern this is a problem and start alerting much sooner, and actually probably alerting on something that would have been missed through traditional systems. And another great thing about the way that we're doing this is instead of just limiting yourself to 3 or 4 metrics that you would normally monitor with some type of tool, because if you go more than 3 or 4 metrics that you're looking at, that's more thresholds that you're going to have to adjust, and it's more management that you're going to have to do, and just folks don't have the resources to do that, so they limit it to, I'm just going to alarm on 2 or 3 different things. Well, because Netuitive has automated analytics and we do the analysis to create this contextual baseline, we are able to dive into the minutia. We pull in a lot of different metrics that can be related to performance. So instead of just saying, hey, you've got a memory alert, we're able to pinpoint this is the type of memory alert that we're seeing, and we're also seeing a correlation problem between memory and disk. So let's isolate this as part of the root cause of the problem and start looking here. So this is a much better way to do system management. So once we've done the analysis, now we can give you a visualization or a display of what's going on. And here we've got a couple of different screens, and I love these. Our customers call these gumballs because they change colors and they look like little gumballs. And then these have been called chiclets. So you can tell where our customers' minds are. But this shows 2 different things here. We've on this particular screen up here at the top, the elements by type, this is showing us health score. And down at the bottom, this is showing a workload. And workload to Netuitive is real-time resource utilization. So this is showing us that this particular entity, this managed element, is very busy, and he's only got about 5% more headroom where he can continue processing. So being able to look at how busy an entity is over a period of time, or right now, or as a problem is happening, is fairly important. And then up here on the health, we give you the ability to help define what the health scores look like. So from a statistical problem analysis, we can say, okay, well, this is what we think the health should be on this. But we take it a step further and we're like, okay, well, you as the customer can define how these different issues that we're identifying are going to impact the health and impact your health score. And we can see that, over here we've got some, all these guys are available. We've got high workload on this VM, but he's very healthy. And just at a glance, you're able to say, you know what, this guy is just busy. There's no problem with him. And, so it's just very easy to start the triage process. So this is the visualization for health and workload. And when we have issues, you have the ability to dive in and start to do some alarm investigation. And this is part of our triage process. This is a slide that's going to help us show what's going on with the particular problem. And then here we've got an incident that's showing, and an incident is a contiguous block of alerts that we've noticed, or we've picked up on. And here on this particular incident, we can see the health, what it was looking like over a period of time. We can see when we started alarming, okay? And then it's going to show us there was anomalistic behavior at one point. We had a very high workload, which was related to memory right here. And we can see that from a problem perspective, it started the VM memory ballooning process, and it also affected our end user customer experience by a slow login. And it gives you the ability to dive into these certain things. For instance, if you clicked right here on the VM memory ballooning, it's going to create a graph, and it's going to show you exactly when that ballooning started and when it stopped, and also give you some recommendations or description. We can interpret those types of alarms and share that information with you, and allow you to have your own workflow processing built into it. And this is just a great example here on that step response time. You can see that there's different colored bands here. The green band is the single metric, so if you're just looking at step response time within one particular metric, you can see where the standard deviations above and below kind of create that. And then you can also see that there's a blue bandwidth here, and that blue bandwidth is the calculator of computed bandwidth that we got from learning the relationships. And it's very easy to see right here at this point in time, the step response time increased exponentially and went outside of that tolerance band that we have. And we can see that this is something that was important to a customer, and it was an alarm type situation. So these type of performance assistants, these types of screens help you to dig in and triage what's going on much more quickly than traditional systems, I believe. And lastly, some of the benefits of Netuitive. We give you visibility into the health of your applications. Just from a visibility perspective, being able to show a service, an end-to-end service in one particular view, and be able to isolate the different components of that service so that when you do have a problem, you can go directly to the area that's causing the impact instead of having to pull a lot of people together and try to figure out, well, where do we start? So this could dramatically help you move into the second point where you could isolate the problems faster. You don't have to have those triage tiger team calls. You know that because you've got the visualization that's showing you the problem is over here with your web server, you don't need the application server and the database server and the firewall people all in the line with you. You start there at the web server point and you work your way out. You just, hey, let's call these guys and find out what's going on and why we're having these issues. And just hopefully it's going to isolate. This is where the problem is from, and you're going to be able to fix it before it affects your end users. And ultimately, that's what we're after: is proactive notification of impending performance problems. So the visibility, helping you to isolate the problems and become more proactive, is really some of the sweet spots of Netuitive. Thanks for listening.